So, why did we start the PlayLabs Accelerator? The first reason is that we wanted to create a home for startups that were utilizing playful technologies. We define that very broadly as video game or entertainment technology that can really be applied in any industry. In fact, I would contend that much of the software and hardware we use today owes a debt of gratitude to the video games of the past. For example, one of the very first graphical user interfaces anywhere was from a game called Space War, which was built on a mainframe computer here at MIT back in the 1960s. Today's chatbots and natural language processing have their roots within the adventure games of the 1970s and 1980s, as well as the multi-user dungeons from the early days of the internet. Today, virtual reality and augmented reality are fairly common technologies, but they also owe a debt of gratitude to the video games of the past, both in terms of first person rendering perspective as well as the idea of a heads up display or a way to augment what the player is seeing from that perspective. But that's not all. Today, artificial intelligence and machine learning are all the rage, as many of you know. Well, the first practical artificial intelligence computer was really a machine built by Professor Claude Shannon here at MIT back in the 1950s. And its purpose was to play games. In fact, it was to play chess. If you look closely at this image, you can see the little chess pieces on top there. In fact, the ability of a computer to play against a human has been one of the benchmarks of the development of artificial intelligence with both traditional games and today computers are playing humans in esports or computer games as well, which is an interesting twist. The first time I ever saw an example of machine learning anything was in the 1980s movie War Games, where the computer played tic-tac-toe against itself in order to teach itself that there are some games like global thermonuclear war where there is no winner. So we may actually owe a lot to this type of machine learning in the future. Of course, CPUs and GPUs have been driven by the needs of video games, going all the way back to games like Space Invaders from the 1970s or Infinity Blade, which really pushed the limits of the iPhone as it was developing its graphics engine processing capabilities. This year, we added blockchain and cryptocurrency as one of the playful technologies in our cohort. Now, you might ask, what does blockchain or crypto have to do with playful technologies? Quite a bit. Before there was digital currency in the form of Bitcoin and Ether, the most widely traded digital currencies existed within virtual economies, within video games like World of Warcraft, Ultima Online, or Second Life. In fact, the whole idea of a crypto-based blockchain, which is a trustless system, is based on a field called game theory, where you play out what each of the players will do, and that's how you validate, whether a cryptocurrency really and a blockchain is really a trustless system. And not many people know this, but the biggest Bitcoin exchange in the early days was a site called Mt. Gox. Mt. Gox actually stood for Magic the Gathering Online Exchange originally. So it also had its origins within the gaming industry. So the second reason we started PlayLabs was based on my own experience with my very first startup when I graduated from MIT. And back then we had no office space. We started in our living room. We were the proverbial two guys in a garage, even though it's a little cold in New England garages, so we were in our living room. We had no money. We literally had to borrow $5,000 from my co-founder Mitch's parents so that we could go to our first conference. And we would buy computers and return them within 30 days just so that we would have some extra machines to test our software. We also had very little access to mentors. And so when we structured PlayLabs, we wanted to give the companies just enough money so that they didn't have to go out and buy and return computers like we did. And they had a little bit of money for infrastructure and travel. But really, we wanted to see if we could take out some of the kinks in the road to success, right? Many people think that startups are a straight line where you introduce a product and everything is successful. But the reality is there are many twists and turns along the way. And so we wanted our accelerator to be a place where we could reduce some of those twists and turns as we got the companies to graduate and be on their way on their great startup adventure. which brings me to the theme of Play Labs. Now, there's many different metaphors people use for business and for startups, some like war or competitive metaphors. At Play Labs, we're a playful group, and we believe that the right theme is that building a startup is like taking an entrepreneurial adventure like an Indiana Jones film. Now, many of you may have seen the films Raiders of the Lost Ark or his other films, and you'll notice in those films, wouldn't it be nice if Indy got a map right at the beginning of the film and it just told him exactly where the treasure was? And all he had to do was just go there and pick up the treasure. Well, that's never how it works, is it? First of all, it wouldn't make for a very interesting movie. Secondly, the way it works is that Indy receives a clue, he follows that clue, and where does that lead him? To the very next clue. And where does that lead him? To the very next clue. And that really is the heart of the entrepreneurial journey. We wanted to help our startups navigate the clues that will take them to their own unique version of success. The second reason I like this metaphor is that you'll notice there are all these guys surrounding Indiana Jones. I call them colorful characters. Some of them are there to help Indy on his adventure. Some are there to hinder him as obstacles and competitors. And some are a bit more ambiguous. It seems like they're there to help, but they really have their own motives. Well, it turns out that's true on the entrepreneurial journey as well. Entrepreneurs encounter all kinds of advisors and competitors and colorful characters, and we're hoping that many of you in the audience will become colorful characters who can help our entrepreneurs along the way in their journey. I also like to use the stages of the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell because it's very similar to how a startup adventure goes. An entrepreneur hears a call to adventure. They might refuse the call. They jump across the threshold, equip themselves for the journey with a team of adventurers, find themselves on the road of trials, and almost every startup adventure has a visit to the underworld, where you have to deal not just with external factors, but with your own internal demons of greed, hope, and emotions. And if you're able to come through that as an entrepreneur, you can find the treasure. The treasure is not always a financial reward, although obviously startups can be financially rewarding. It can also be a personal reward. Just like at the end of The Lord of the Rings, when the hobbits had to go back to the Shire, anyone who goes through the startup journey will find themselves a different person. And that's the essence of the theme we have at Play Labs for our teams of adventurers. So with that said, I'd like to thank you again for joining us at the second annual Demo Day and hope that you will want to join some of our teams of adventurers on their great journeys ahead. Thank you.